مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون
الصلاة والسلام عليك
اللهم صل.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. These verses, contained within the heart of the Quran, Surah Ya Sin, are often attributed to the martyr Habib-i-Neccar, also known as Habib the Carpenter, although his profession is a point of controversy among scholars, like many things about this man, as you'll see. Let us begin by going over why these verses are associated with Habib. Firstly, we must understand that this is not just an associative name. Rather, that this man of the people of Yasin was mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ as Habib-i-Neccar. Ibn Abbas and Ka'b al-Ahbar radiyallahu anhum, as well as Wahb ibn Munabbih al-Yamani, all gave their account regarding this, and it has been transmitted into many exegetes throughout Ibn Ishaq, who himself was a student of Imam al-Bukhari. Thus, we know that this information is generally credible. It is also generally agreed upon that through these same sources, the people of Yasin mentioned here are idolaters from Antioch, modern-day Antakya in Turkey. This is about the extent of what we know for sure regarding Habib. The rest differs depending on which exegesis that you're reading, so the Tafsir you're reading. Naseer al Baydawi, in his exegesis The Lights of Revelation and the Secrets of Interpretation, suggested that Habib was a contemporary of Isa alayhi salam, and that the messengers mentioned in verse 14 of Yasin were not messengers in the prophetic sense, rather disciples of Jesus, who he referred to as St. John and St. Jude from the New Testament. Habib met with the two disciples, according to this story, and asked them how they could prove to him that they were being truthful. St. John and St. Jude claimed that they could miraculously heal the sick, which is an attribute of many prophets, although here it is attributed to a disciple. Conveniently for Habib, His son was ill. Well, not really conveniently, but you get what I'm trying to say. His son was ill, so he brought him to the two disciples, and by mere touch, he was healed. That day, Habib became a believer in the message of Jesus and began to spread it to the rest of Antioch alongside the disciples. An issue arose, however, when they reached the governor of the city, who, when told the truth, imprisoned the disciples and rejected their message. This is when the third messenger, mentioned in the same ayah, who al Baydawi identifies as Saint Peter, or Shamma ibn Hamun, arrived in the city. And he was able to gain an audience with the governor. Skipped a bit of the story, but he was able to gain an audience with the governor. He had with him a child who had been dead for 7 days, and through the miracle of God, St. Peter revived the child, who then spoke to the governor and told him that he had seen Isa alayhi salam, the baby, in heaven. The governor then believed himself, but much of his city did not still, and so Habib continued to preach, which angered the locals and ended in his stoning and ultimate acceptance into paradise as a martyr. Based on this story, many people connect Habib with Saint Agabus, I think I'm saying that right, from the New Testament, but this is heavily disputed. It's kind of just a baseless inference, because the main point is Agabus was he was martyred in Jerusalem according to the New Testament, whereas Habib was martyred in Antioch. The connection is made by the similarity in their stories. Other exegetes, however, have different stories. Al Qurtubi, another Quranic exegete, tells a similar story, but he does not name the messengers and gives more information on Habib himself. He focuses more on his person. He claims that Habib worked many different professions and names him as a roper, cobbler, and carpenter, among other things, which is where the title most likely comes from, carpenter, although, as I said, his profession is a bit of a controversial topic. Well, not really controversial, but disagreed upon, in a sense. Most associate him with the profession of a carpenter, and thus comes his title. He was, according to this story, a leper, and an idolater who prayed to idols every single day, asking them to relieve him of his ailment, but of course, nothing happened. It was only when the messengers arrived that he was finally healed, when he was touched by them, which is when he began to believe. This is, of course, in contradiction to the story of his ill son told by al-Baydawi, and this is generally the accepted story by most contemporary scholars. Ibn Kathir, the most well-known of all Quranic exegetes throughout history, alludes to what he calls a rumor that the messengers of Ya Sin were Jesus' disciples, and does not say whether this is true or false. He also does not mention St. Jude, and instead refers to someone named Paul in his place, which, I will note, cannot be Paul of Tarsus. At least, I can't imagine it would be, as Islam rejects Pauline Christianity and the false teachings that he spread, and claims it to be the corrupted version of Christianity. Some completely reject the notion that this story occurs at the time of Isa alayhi salam and claim it to be much older. Under this interpretation, the messengers mentioned are prophets, and their names are often given as Shalom, Masduq, and Sadduq. I don't have the names in Arabic, only the Arabic translation, so I might be saying that wrong. I would like to note, however, that this is considered false by most contemporary scholars who agree with al-Qurtubi's view. Now we will be talking about why he is important. As we can see, there are many different tales of Habib, and it is up to you which one you believe is true. However, that does not take away from the message, which remains mostly the same throughout each telling of the story. However, I will focus on al-Qurtubi's version of the story, mostly because it goes more in detail on his person, and how he was himself, and how he lived before the messengers arrived, and also the most accepted telling of the story. In this tale, Habib had been worshipping idols for 70 years, asking that they cure his leprosy. Of course, as I mentioned previously, they're merely idols and nothing changed. His terrible condition remained. Considering that this account is true, which I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying let's consider it for the sake of this, it must be noted that leprosy is not only an external disfigurement, but also that it can cause severe nerve damage and even paralysis if untreated, which at the time it most likely would have been. It causes your body to be covered in sores which are susceptible to infection. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that the lifespan of someone suffering with leprosy would have been significantly shorter during classical antiquity, which is when this story is meant to have taken place. The fact that Habib had been suffering with leprosy for over 70 years it seems a bit strange, but is actually a proof of God's mercy, and I'll explain why. Habib was an idolater for his entire life, worshipping idols and asking them to help him with his leprosy. If he had died before these messengers arrived in Antioch, he would have died a non-believer. Because of God's ultimate mercy, he survived until the arrival of these messengers and was not only cured of his ailment, but also had his heart softened by God so that he may believe. The length of his earthly suffering could have easily been one of the factors leading to his willingness to accept the truth. He was already suffering with leprosy for, as it says, as Qurtubi says, al-Qurtubi, 70 years. So of course, if somebody comes along after 70 years of praying to idols and heals it with a mere touch, you'll be more willing to believe than if you had just, if you were young and you had been suffering for maybe a good portion of your life, but definitely not 70 years. Not only this, but he went on to die a martyr and was admitted into paradise as stated in Surah Ya Sin, in verse 26. It was stated unto him, enter paradise. We can see the extent of God's mercy through this tale, as well as the importance of patience, or sabr. Even as an idolater, Habib was devoted to his worship, as it was the only thing he knew, and he was patient, and eventually he was rewarded by Allah. Ar-Rahim, As-Subur, Ar-Rashid, Al-Mu'min, Al-Shafi, Al-Wahid. Anyways, I'd just like to continue on to some closing notes. Of course, this is the first video that will be uploaded to this channel. I made this channel to teach people more about obscure stories from the history of Islam and analyze secular history from the perspective of Islam as well. This story is more explicitly religious than most videos I will make, since it's based on a story taken directly from the Quran, just elaborated on by different exegetes later on. The story of the people in Yasin is well known, but most people do not know about Habib specifically, whose story is elaborated on, as I said, by the Mufassirs. Even if it is not 100% certain who exactly Habib was, it is interesting to examine who he might have been and analyze his story as told by different scholars of Islam. And also, I would just like to say, forgive me for any mistakes I might have made, and I'm not well learned in Arabic just yet, so I might have made some minor errors in pronunciation and this sort of thing. So just correct me, yeah, that should be all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.